Hey everyone, welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. Kyle Yates and Mike Tagliere back here with you for another episode. You can find both of us on Twitter at KyleYNFL and at Mike Tagliere NFL if you don't follow us already, which I highly recommend that you do to stay up to date on all breaking news in the NFL and the fantasy impact. Tags, we are 1 week away from football being back, buddy.
We are. We have an action-packed show, too. We're going to be covering a ton of players that you guys need to know about before you draft this weekend. So I'm not even going to waste time talking about Beanie Babies. We're getting into it.
Yep. Hey, we got Matt Freedman back with us today to make sure to cover all these players. He's the editor-in-chief at Fantasy Labs, which is part of the Action Network, and he can be found on Twitter at MattFTheOracle. Matt, welcome back to the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast.
Thanks for having me. Still a little insulted that you won't let me use my video. I mean, if I'm not here for my looks, what am I here for? Certainly not my Ronald Jones takes.
Well, for your voice, because it's the must-have players episode, and well, I mean, if I'm wrong, I'm just going to say it was Friedman talking. It wasn't me.
Vice versa.
Yeah,
so it's perfect. We both have total deniability.
There we go.
I was going to mention that too, so that's perfect. All right, guys. Hey, before we move on, we've got an amazing giveaway that I want to make sure we remind everyone about. This includes a signed Davante Adams helmet, a $200 gift card for Pristine Auction, a $200 gift card to Porter Road Butcher, a package of fantasy football goods for your league's champion and last place loser from Trophy Smack, and a 1-month subscription to Fubo TV. We'll be giving this grand prize package away once we hit 7,000 reviews on Apple Podcasts, and we are at 6,976 right now. I checked earlier this morning, and guys, the reviews have been pouring in. Thank you so much for these. We read every single one of them. We love seeing those come in. In addition, we are going to be giving a bonus to the winner if they are a subscriber to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/fantasypros. And the bonus prize will be a Zoom call with our fantasy analysts. To enter, head to fantasypros.com/contest and fill out the form there. Just leave an honest review on iTunes or Stitcher for the podcast and use the form to submit your screenshot of your review along with your screenshot of your YouTube subscription to qualify for the bonus prize. Again, to enter and get more details on this monster prize package giveaway, just head to fantasypros.com/contest. Also, with the NFL season soon here, I also want to quickly tell you about the Daily Juice podcast. It's a betting-focused podcast that we release every day all year round. And Betting Pros host Matt Peralt spends 15 minutes sharing his insight and picks on each day's most notable bets across all sports. This includes the NFL, MLB, NBA, UFC, NASCAR, and NHL. And by the way, Matt is seriously good. He came into Monday hitting on 11 straight bets, so you're going to want to check this out. The Daily Juice podcast is now available on all major podcast platforms, and you can also listen to it at bettingpros.com/dailyjuice. All right, guys, let's move into some news items here. So much changes in a 24-hour period in the NFL, and I love it. So we've got a few things here. Leonard Fournette. He found a new home already, and it's with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He signs a 1-year deal to join this backfield with Ronald Jones. Let's talk about the fantasy significance of this. What are your thoughts, Tags?
What are my thoughts? A lot of them. And I've gone through a roller coaster ever since that signing took place because I had drafted Ronald Jones in like the 6th round, thinking I was getting a deal yesterday about 20 minutes before that signing took place, so it was a little bit tilting for me. But we have to take a step back and say, is it possible there's a timeshare? Sure. But we have to look at the facts here. Okay, Ronald Jones did not get a workhorse load despite being, in competition with Peyton freaking Barber. Then they go out and they draft Keyshawn Vaughn in the 3rd round. Clearly someone that they're not high on. This signing actually says a lot more about Keyshawn Vaughn. He's completely droppable in redraft formats. In Dynasty, he's dropping down the ranks like significantly. He's just basically a nobody at this point. They went out there and they signed LaShawn McCoy. LaShawn McCoy is done. I think we've all known that, but I think they realized it too. So then now they go and they sign Leonard Fournette. Everything they're telling you says that we are not really comfortable with Ronald Jones despite everything that we've been saying, which really sucks because I was in on him around his 6th round ADP, sometimes 7th round. So right now I have Leonard Fournette right around the RB20 range. I don't want to take him in the 3rd or 4th round because there's a lot of good wide receivers and or tight ends in that territory. But if you get him in the 5th round, I'm okay with the risk there because Leonard Fournette's been cast into this ugly, like he's not good at football and this and that. But I think, again, I've said on the show before, is that if Leonard Fournette had started in a different offense, I think people would have a different view about the player that he is today.
That's fair, and it's so frustrating because Tags, I literally just started coming around on Ronald Jones and was starting to buy in, and then this happened. So, Matt, let's get your thoughts here really quick. What are your thoughts here on the Leonard Fournette signing, and where do you have him landing in your rankings now?
Yeah, I think he leads the backfield, although I do expect it to be something of a split similar to what we saw last year. Right now, I have Fournette around RB 30, 35-ish. He's still not someone I actually want to draft because I think there's going to be a lot of fluctuation in that backfield. And I should just say, I think it's hilarious seeing some of the Keyshawn Vaughn truthers on Twitter, because it's like a misery loves company type of situation where they're happy that Ronald Jones and his truthers have been taken out. But of course, it also means just more misery for them. So they kind of don't know how to react.
I'll say this, Leonard Fournette landed at RB27 in my rankings after I did projections today. Ronald Jones at RB43. So I do expect this to be a split. However, the thing that we have to take into consideration is that they're signing, Leonard Fournette is coming into a new scheme 10 days before their first game, right? So for him, the expectation for him to get right up to speed and him to suddenly take over this job from Ronald Jones, who has been in this scheme for a full year and a full offseason, we have to temper expectations. He is not going to take over this backfield right away. So I have Ronald Jones being the guy for the first few weeks of the season, and then it starts to even out, and then I think we start to see Leonard Fournette take over. So even though I do have Fournette finishing as RB27 in my projections on the season, that doesn't necessarily mean that I want to rely on him the first few weeks of the season. So just keep that in mind if you are drafting this weekend, if you haven't drafted already, and don't go like overpaying for Leonard Fournette. There are some people that are really, really excited for Leonard Fournette in this offense. Again, temper your expectations. I think it's going to be more of a split. Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick, I want to say they're playing the Saints in week 1. It's a terrible matchup. So if anything, this is going to help Fournette if he's being eased into the offense. It just might make Ronald Jones actually look worse. Against the Saints last year, Ronald Jones totaled 48 yards on 13 carries. Nothing spectacular there, obviously. They're a great run defense. But real quick, I want to ask you guys, someone asked me on Twitter last night because there were some like crazy reactions to Leonard Fournette when he was cut. People cut him from their fantasy roster. If you're in a league that has a fab budget right now and they're being unloaded, let's say on Monday or Tuesday when waivers would typically go, how much fab are you willing to spend on someone like Leonard Fournette? I said I'm probably willing to spend almost all of it because, I mean, that money's not worth anything, later in the season. This is where it's worth the most. And he's a running back, as much as we don't want to admit it, like, he might have top 12 upside. It's the same thing that we said about Ronald Jones, right? That, he was a guy that we knew the risk involved with him when we were drafting him, but we knew he also had top 12 scoring upside in a top 10 offense. So how much fab would you guys spend on him if you guys were in a league that was like that?
Matt, I'll just throw this to you.
Fab on, I don't know. I guess like if it's $1,000, I'd say maybe like 250.
Okay, so 25% you're in with.
Yeah, so that's a big difference, guys. Let's talk about that for a second. That's a big difference where Tags is saying spend all of it. Matt's saying only 25%. I probably land somewhere in the middle, which means that I might not get him, right? And I think that's going to be the same thing for Matt, where if you're only going to be willing to spend 25%, you're probably not going to get him. So, again, it all comes to tempering expectations. If he does become the guy in this backfield, then, of course, he's going to return value on you spending, all of your fab tags. But is that a guarantee at this point, right? We have to play the percentage chances. And again, him coming into this offense right away. But it also does go to speak to the fact that you're not going to find this quality of a running back on your waivers, right? If Leonard Fournette is sitting there, this might be worth the investment to go get him. To have at least Leonard Fournette as a bench running back at this point. Because again, you've solidified your roster at this point. You might be dropping a Damien Harris to go pick up Leonard Fournette.
Right.
I would do that.
And I wanted to say 75% is what I would spend on him. That's really the answer I initially wanted to say, but then I was like, someone in your league is willing to spend 100. Right. Like I guarantee it. Someone is willing to do it. And it's like, do I want someone else to get a potentially top 12 running back for free? And no, I don't.
Okay. All right, let's move on here, guys. Alvin Kamara reportedly back at practice while there are ongoing discussions in regards to his contract. At this point, it's highly unlikely that we see Kamara traded. Even though I'm not particularly sure where the money is going to come from for a contract extension in New Orleans, but I do think they get this done. Matt, does this solidify Kamara back into the top 5 of drafts for you?
Yeah, I never bumped him down. I have him in the top 4. Right after the big 3. I just have him number 4 locked in there, and I'm very comfortable with him.
Perfect. Tags, I know that we had talked that there was some hesitation and that you would consider Derrick Henry over, or at least in that conversation with Kamara. Does this move Kamara back up into that RB4 spot?
No, what's crazy, Yates, is that you and I were in a draft yesterday, actually our Fantasy Pros draft, and I had the number 4 pick, and I didn't even realize it until we got in the room, and I was like, oh no, I have that choice. And I ultimately went with Derrick Henry, and I did that because Basically, the difference that I have between Kamara and Henry in my projections, it might turn out to like a fantasy point per game, something like that, which is not crazy. It would have been, I would have taken Kamara had I had no concerns, but add in the contract situation and this epidural shot that we're hearing about. We're going to talk to Dr. Chow about that actually tomorrow. We're going to ask him his thoughts on it, but it's all about risk reward for me. And if you're taking someone like Kamara in the first round, and if he's not on the field for whatever reason, you just blew that first round pick, and you can ruin your fantasy league if you miss on that RB1. So I'm willing to take Derrick Henry in a potential, and I understand the ceiling's not as high as it is with Kamara, but I will take Derrick Henry as of right now, unless I get something from Dr. Chow tomorrow telling me that he's totally not concerned about it. But an epidural, that's a big deal.
Yeah, for me, he's still solidified as RB4. I want him on my roster this year if I do have that number 4 overall spot, just like Matt there. So, okay, guys, some other things here super quick. Mohamed Sanu is going to be released by the Patriots after they spent a second-round pick for him at the trade deadline last season. This bumps up someone like Jacoby Myers for me, but not to the point where I'd be considering him outside of super deep leagues. Are you guys with me on that one?
Yeah, it's ugly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not on Jacoby Myers at all. Maybe a little bit, but I gave also just a little bit more of a bump to the 2 tight ends, Devin Asiasi and Dalton Keene. I think we're going to see sort of 2010 type of Patriots 2 tight end offense.
Yeah, N'Keal Harry got a bump for me as well.
Sure. Okay, guys. So then George Kittle also returned to practice on Wednesday. He should be good to go for week 1 and ready to see 20-plus targets because they don't have anyone else on this roster at the wide receiver position. Justin Jefferson is reportedly set to be the Vikings' number 3 wide receiver. Olabisi Johnson has apparently been playing well enough in camp to start the season as the outside receiver. If you're drafting Justin Jefferson, you just need to temper expectations. You might need to move him down your board. Additionally, Damien Harris, the Patriots running back, recently had surgery on his pinky finger, which means he may miss the start of the season. Matt, are you going to have any Patriots running backs on your fantasy football roster this season?
Yeah, I mean, I have a little bit of Damien Harris, but he's the only one at this point. And, for a split second, Sony Michel did get probably too cheap, but I still really wasn't investing in him on that point. But Harris, and then just a little bit of Harris and not much else.
Yeah, Tags, what about you? Is this a backfield that you might just want to avoid altogether? Because that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, Sony Michel is going for $2 or $3 in a lot of auction drafts that I've done, so it's getting to the point where I actually might invest there because if Damien Harris is going to miss the season opener, obviously now with Mohamed Sanu gone, this is clearly going to be a run-heavy team. So, I mean, Sony Michel for $2 or $3, it's fine in an auction, but I'm not going to invest any capital on these guys.
All right, last thing here, KJ Hamler, the Broncos rookie wide receiver, could potentially start the year on IR, and this could open up some targets for Jerry Jeudy, and he could be a low-end wide receiver 3 right away if they're remaining in 12 personnel heavily, which is 1 running back, 2 tight ends on the field. You're going to feature Noah Fant, and then they do have Albert O that they brought in from Missouri this offseason too in the draft. So, and then that would mean bringing on Deshaun Hamilton into the slot on third downs, and he did nothing with his opportunity last year. So Jerry Jeudy he just continues to climb up rankings lately, right, Tags?
Yep. Yeah, he's somebody that I've been moving up, and I would prefer Hamler to be on the field than Deshaun because I don't think Hamilton's going to play on the perimeter very much, and I wanted someone like Hamler who can play both inside and outside. I wanted him to flip-flop with Jeudy, maybe half the time. It would have been nice to get Jeudy in the slot, but either way, it's going to open up some targets because they clearly don't like Deshaun Hamilton.
And
yeah,
I think Tags,
go ahead, Matt.
I think Tags that there's actually the possibility that they go with Tim Patrick as the third starter.
About to say
and
that,
then,
yeah.
And so that would push Jeudy into this slot, I think, in almost a full-time role there, which would be great.
Yeah, for sure.
It would be great. Yeah, we'll keep an eye on that as more reports come out. Okay, guys, we are talking about our must-have players on today's show. You think you heard me talk about Jonnu Smith before? Get ready for today's show, guys. We're talking about our must-have players. We have got 10 players each that we are going to go through, so we're not going to spend a ton of time going back and forth. We're going to go countdown style format and just walk our way down our lists. These are the guys that we hope can serve as tiebreakers for you when you're on the clock. Ultimately, our hope is to create smarter and better fantasy football players. So we want you to disagree with us. We want you to have your own facts and opinions to back it up. So if you have your own rankings, that's amazing. If not, no worries. We make it super easy for you to draft with our draft assistant and cheat sheet creator. But hopefully these guys can be used as a tiebreaker when you're torn between 2 players when you're on the clock. You can lean back on the fact that Tag says he loves this player, for example, to make your selection a little bit easier. So let's get into it, guys. Again, we've got 30 players to get through. So we've ordered these guys from 10 down to 1 on our list. Tags, who do you have at number 10 for your must-have player?
And number 10 is a player that's still somehow, I checked the ADP this morning to see where he's going, and Anthony Miller is going outside the top 150 players, and it makes absolutely zero sense to me. You have a player that is probably going to see 100-plus targets in his offense going outside the top 150, a guy that in the slot who's, when he does get targeted, he's been very efficient. And now with Taylor Gabriel off the field, if you look at the 7 games that he played without Taylor Gabriel last year, his pace would have been 103 targets. So, bringing in Ted Ginn does absolutely nothing for this offense. I don't even know why that signing took place. I don't know why Jimmy Graham took place. I question a lot of the Bears' moves. But knowing that, they don't have much running back depth, there's only so many places these targets can actually go. And Anthony Miller, I'm a big fan of buying players on an offense that drastically underperformed last year. And this Bears offense was clearly one that drastically underperformed. Anthony Miller had a great offseason. Matt Nagy said that he's finally become the player that they wanted him to be. And that's huge because Nagy was not getting him on the field to start the year last year. And then you've seen that play increase. So Anthony Miller, outside the top 150 players, he's an easy selection for me. If you get to like that 12th round, it's like a no-brainer.
Foreshadowing, Anthony Miller was on my list as well. This is a guy that I absolutely want on my fantasy football rosters. Matt, I'll just throw it to you really quick. Is Anthony Miller a guy who you get to that 12th round that you're looking to bring in?
No, I think there are other wide receivers I like a little bit more in that spot. And for the most part, I'm just hands off when it comes to that entire Bears offense.
Okay, that's fair. So Anthony Miller was my guy, but let's go over to Matt for your number 10 here at the for the must-have players.
So I'm thinking more for a 2-quarterback league with this one. Tyrod Taylor is someone who really stands out. And so if you want to take a little more of a late-round quarterback approach while not entirely ignoring the quarterback position, I think you can go with a quarterback early on and then later in your draft get Tyrod Taylor. I'm expecting him to start most, if not all, of the season for the Chargers. We've seen him in his years at Buffalo be a low-end QB1, high-end QB2. I'm expecting an offense that looks pretty similar to what we saw in Buffalo. We know that with his rushing ability, he has a pretty decent floor, and he's got some, actually, I think, underappreciated weapons with the Chargers, and Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams whenever he returns, and then obviously tight end Hunter Henry. So, if we get 13 starts, and we can't sort of assume that we're going to, but I think there's a pretty good chance that this defense is good enough to keep the Chargers in games and to get them wins. And as long as they're winning, I think Tyrod continues to start. So he's someone I really like as a late option in 2-quarterback or super flex leagues.
I love the call. I've been touting Tyrod Taylor as someone to keep an eye on, especially in 2-quarterback leagues, but then potentially even as a sleeper. Let's say you're in a 14-team league and you miss out on the run of quarterbacks and you just want to take one late. And you're looking at guys like Daniel Jones, who has a Pittsburgh, right, week 1, as far as a matchup. Or you can start Tyrod Taylor against Cincinnati in week 1. That's the one that I want. I think he's going to have this streamer potential. And as long as he's on the field with his rushing ability, he can absolutely be a low-end QB1, especially with the weapons that he has. I love the call there, Matt. Again, like I mentioned, my guy was Anthony Miller there at the number 10 spot. So let's bring it right back around to Tags for the number 9. Who is your number 9 must-have player?
I'm going to say Latavius Murray. His current ADP is outside the top 40 running backs, which makes it an easy selection for me. Once you get outside the top 30 running backs, you're talking about running backs who have a lot of question marks and a lot of the handcuff running backs, right? So what makes Latavius Murray much different than Kareem Hunt? I understand Kareem Hunt, got, a dozen touches per game last year, even with Nick Chubb on the field, but it's a new offense they're running there. We can't say anything with guarantees. Latavius Murray is going to have a role in the Saints team, and especially if Alvin Kamara is not on the team, if he is dealing with this back issue, whatever it is. He had a knee issue last year that he played through. He didn't have surgery on it. There's a lot of question marks surrounding Alvin Kamara right now, and Latavius Murray does not have that baked into his price at all, because when Alvin Kamara missed those 2 games last year, he was the RB1. It wasn't like, he can be a top 12 running back. No. He was the number 1 running back for those 2 weeks. So Latavius Murray has so much value, and I really have no idea why he's not being drafted around. I'm not saying he needs to be drafted as high as Kareem Hunt, but I think that Latavius Murray should be drafted as a top 35 running back minimum. And if you want to take him as like the RB 30, 32, I am more than okay with that.
We saw the New Orleans Saints, their rushing passing splits differentiate a lot last year comparative to what they've had in previous seasons, where you saw them be very run heavy, right, in 2018. And then with Kamara missing some time last year, not being fully healthy, we saw them lean more towards the passing game. And of course, losing Drew Brees for those games too didn't help, or for some of those games, last season didn't help matters. So I expect them to get back towards a more balanced rushing attack, and if that happens, Latavius Murray is going to get enough work to absolutely return value, just being drafted outside the top 40 running backs by himself. But then you factor in that he has this built-in upside that if Kamara misses time, he can be the RB1. Absolutely, I'm taking him everywhere that I can. Matt, let's go over to you here for your number 9 must-have player.
I'm going with Henry Ruggs III, wide receiver, the Las Vegas Raiders. It's a situation where I was already fairly optimistic on him, especially just because I've been doing best ball stuff, and with his volatility, you would think that he could have some splash weeks there. But now that Tyrell Williams is on IR, I think it gives Ruggs a little bit more of a floor. And I don't want to blaspheme by saying that he has like Tyreek Hill type of potential, but with his youth, with his speed, with the target opportunities that he might get in that offense, with the fact that I think they're going to move him around the formation a good amount. I don't know. I think there's some significant splash potential there for season long in your regular redraft leagues in addition to best ball. So I like that upside, and being able to get someone like that outside of the top 36 wide receivers, you don't need to depend on him right away. I think that's really intriguing.
Especially after Tyrell Williams missing or being put on IR. I love this call, and I moved Henry Ruggs dangerously far up in my rankings. I was like, okay, I need to back him down just a little bit. I need to temper expectations here. Matt, where exactly do you have him ranked?
So I have him, I believe, around wide receiver 35, which feels a little bit high. Sorry, I'm looking through the rankings right now, but I think that's roughly where I have him.
No, yeah. I've got him at wide receiver 33, so I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I have wide receiver 41. I do like Ruggs, and I'm going to sit down and go back through projections one more time now that Tyrell Williams has been ruled out for the year, because it's going to give him a slight bump. But yeah, I think he's that guy you want as a wide receiver 4 on your fantasy team, and then you kind of plug him in certain matchups. Like week 1, for example, they're going up against Carolina Panthers, a team that allowed over 14 receptions a game to wide receivers last year. So Ruggs is going to be a DFS probably tournament favorite of mine in week 1. It might be wise to fade him at the beginning just to see how this offense is using him. But overall, I definitely dig Ruggs, especially where he's being drafted.
I think Ruggs, really quick, and then we'll move on. Ruggs this year, I think, is going to be what everyone wants Will Fuller to be. This guy that you can plug in, you don't have to draft him as your wide receiver 3. You can get him outside of that, but you can plug him into your flex, or at Tag said, as a rotational matchup play, and he can absolutely win you a week because he has the game-breaking speed to be able to take a slant to the house, and then you put him up against the corners that Carolina's going to be rolling out in week 1. I absolutely love the call there, Matt. For me, my guy here, looking at my number 9 must-have player, I'm still going with David Montgomery, guys, and this is predicated upon the fact that Matt Nagy was asked about them bringing in Leonard Fournette, and you look at David Montgomery having the groin injury, right? He suffered that, and it came out that he's going to miss potentially 2 to 4 weeks. And then you look at the depth chart behind him. You have Ryan Nall and Artavis Pierce as your guys, and then, of course, Cordell Patterson working out with the running backs, so he's going to see some touches, right? But they don't have anyone that can really, truly step in and carry the load while David Montgomery's out. You have Tariq Cohen, but again, he's not that type of running back. So for him to say that they were going to pass on bringing in Leonard Fournette, or at least not even looking at that they feel comfortable with the guys that they have in their room, that indicates to me that David Montgomery is not going to miss much time, that they don't see this as a significant injury. And so as David Montgomery's ADP continues to fall, and ADP stands for average draft position, as that continues to fall, because people are just, I got him in that. He was ranked in the 80s in Yahoo ADP when we did, and I got him in the 6th round of our draft that we did yesterday, Tags. To be my RB3, RB4 in some instances, I will absolutely take that, because once he's on the field, you have guaranteed volume. Now, it's not going to turn into a top 10 running back, I don't believe, in this offense, but in that range, who are you going to be drafting that's going to get that type of workload? So I want David Montgomery still on my rosters because he can easily step in bye weeks and be a top-end contributor, or he can simply just outperform expectations when he's on the field, and he can finish well above where he's being drafted. So I'm still all in on David Montgomery. Tags, I know that you are cooling on him, but let's just talk about this super quick before we go over to your guy for the next countdown.
Yeah, I'm unfortunately out on Montgomery as a must-own guy. I felt like he was a tremendous value for those who wanted to take that, later running back approach or just like a modified zero running back approach. But now drafting someone with a soft tissue injury like this that was ruled 2 to 4 weeks, it's a recipe for disaster, because if you do draft him to rely on him as even an RB3 or a flex, then you're going, if he goes down, I think it's idiotic. I want to be clear about this. It's idiotic on the Bears' part that they wanted no interest in Leonard Fournette. Fournette's a better version of David Montgomery, and he fits very well with Tariq Cohen. They had zero depth on the roster, and if they rush David Montgomery back, if he says, hey, I'm ready to come back, and he hurts it again, all of a sudden you scratch him for a month, maybe even the season, depending on how bad it is. So I think there's a chance he rushes back because they need him. So I'm not in on David Montgomery anymore. If I get him if you get him on your bench in like the 8th round or something like that, sure, I'll take a shot then. But I don't want to rely on him. I've kind of learned my lesson coming into the season with injured players. But that does lead me to my number 8 player on my list. Is it Tariq Cohen? And we've talked about Bears way too much on this list already. I already know that. But again, this is all about taking advantage of recency bias and how this team just underperformed last year. Tariq Cohen has been an RB2 or better in half of his games over the last 2 years. Okay, that's under Matt Nagy. The last half of his games. Marlon Mack, as the Colts' lead running back, had last year 50% of his games he was an RB2 or better. So it's like, why are we fading Tariq Cohen so much? Why is he falling down draft board? He is the ideal guy to have in your flex. He's going to give you a decent floor, and then if he goes back to the 2018 version that broke some of these big plays, all of a sudden you have yourself a semi-consistent RB2, especially in PPR formats. And then if you look at his ADP, you're just like, he's right around the RB40. It makes absolutely zero sense, guys. Knowing that the Bears don't have another running back on the roster who's going to steal that work from him, there's literally not even a chance. There's nobody. That's why I said it's idiotic they didn't look into Leonard Fournette, because they have no depth on that roster. But Tariq Cohen, if you want to draft it, it's almost like this year's version of James White. I like Tariq Cohen as an RB3 flex type player.
I mean, finishes the RB13 in 2018. And granted, 10.2 yards per reception. Again, saw 90 targets in 2018, 104 targets last season. That's insane. That's an insane target workload for a running back. But we saw his efficiency just take a significant dive down to 5.8 yards per reception with Trubisky struggling as much as he is. Right now, they're still not declaring a starter for the quarterback competition in Chicago, and that leads me to believe that it is going to be Nick Foles, because if it was Trubisky, if Trubisky was outplaying Nick Foles, they would be touting that, and just screaming that from the mountaintops, because they want Trubisky to be this guy. They need him to save their jobs. That's not happening. They're going to turn to Nick Foles, I believe. And if that's the case, that means more of these, less scrambling, because Nick Foles is not as mobile as Mitch Trubisky, and that leads to more opportunities for Tariq Cohen. So I really, really like him this year, too. I know, Matt, that you said you're not in on this Bears offense, so I imagine that he's not on your list. But let's go to a guy who is on your list. Who do you have coming in at number 8?
So number 8, I have Cortland Sutton, and we talked earlier about KJ Hamler being out, and maybe that creates more opportunities for Jerry Jeudy. I think that could also just create maybe some more targets earlier in the season for Cortland Sutton. But even if it doesn't really matter. I'm still fully on board with Sutton. I think the transition from Rich Scangarello to Pat Shurmur at offensive coordinator is going to be pretty big for this offense. In Drew Lock's 5 games last year under Scangarello, they had something of a very slow offense, and they didn't pass all that much. Under Pat Shurmur, in each of the past 4 seasons, with 4 different quarterbacks, Daniel Jones, Eli Manning, Case Keenum, and Sam Bradford, none of whom is a superstar by any means.
Right.
We still saw an offense that played pretty fast and passed, at a pretty high rate. And so I think we're going to see that basic offense in Denver, with Drew Lock progressing from his first year to his second year. I think there are just going to be more opportunities for that entire offense. And Cortland Sutton, I thought was pretty impressive last year. And so if I think that offense is going to be better, and I think Sutton is a pretty ascending player, I'm looking at someone that I think has legitimate top 8 upside at the wide receiver position that you routinely get as a mid-range wide receiver too. So he's someone I absolutely want on my fantasy teams.
One of the most talented wide receivers in the NFL. I think we have to start talking about Sutton in that vein. The only question becomes, what's the volume? What's the passing volume? Where do the targets go in this offense? Because last season you had Cortland Sutton and who else? Right? Like Noah Fant, of course, but he didn't see a huge target workload.
He was a rookie.
Yeah, right, exactly. Now you add in Jerry Jeudy. Now you add in Melvin Gordon, Phillip Lindsay, fully recovered from this wrist injury, whatever. Like, whatever you want to talk about, Albert O now, there are a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. So it all comes down to, is he going to be the clear target alpha in this offense? If he is, then he's absolutely going to return value and be a steady contributor for your fantasy football roster. I would love to have him as a wide receiver too. I think kind of these guys like DK Metcalf, Cortland Sutton are going back-to-back in ADP. I'd love either one of them because I think they do come with top 10 upside if they do separate from the competition on the roster. For me, my number 8 guy is Blake Jarwin. Tight end position here, I've got a few names, of course, that I'm going to mention, but Blake Jarwin's one of them. And looking at his opportunity in this offense, Tags mentioned it recently, that the Dallas Cowboys tight end saw 120 targets last season with Jason Witten, the ghost of Jason Witten, averaging 0 yards after the catch. And then now you're talking about Blake Jarwin and Dalton Schultz are the guys. Dalton Schultz isn't going to get any targets in this offense. It's all Blake Jarwin. This is going to be a top 5 at the worst offense, could compete for a top 3 with Kansas City and Baltimore. I love this offense this year with Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup. There are going to be scoring opportunities, and Blake Jarwin has a huge opportunity in front of him. So he's being drafted outside the top 20 tight ends right now. I want him on my rosters.
I have Jarwin where I missed out on tight ends. I'm oddly enough ending up with more Kittle and Kelsey than I've ever had in any year because those guys are falling to the end of the second round, and I'm pulling the trigger in there almost every single time if I have a pick there. But if I'm going to the later rounds, it's either Hayden Hurst or Blake Jarwin. Those guys are fantastic targets because they're both going to see 70, 80 plus targets, and that's to find that in those double-digit rounds sometimes, it's just rare to find it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's keep the countdown going. Down to number 7. Tags, who do you have?
I'm going with Deontay Johnson here. Deontay Johnson, Steelers, second-year wide receiver. Over his first year, with the team, he saw 92 targets when the team threw the ball just 510 times. Under Ben Roethlisberger, they're going to be closer to that 600 range. From all the reports that we're hearing, Ben Roethlisberger absolutely has the zip on his ball. He's supported, multiple top 36 wide receivers throughout the almost entirety of his career. It's almost like people think that the Steelers are great at drafting wide receivers. They're not. It's just Ben Roethlisberger is a really good quarterback, and he supports them. Deontay Johnson was the number 1 wide receiver in football on the perimeter at yards of separation at target last year, 3.6 yards. By comparison, Kenny Golladay averaged 2.0 yards of separation at target last year. So Deontay Johnson's going to make for a big target for Ben Roethlisberger, creating a lot of separation. And, as much as I like Juju, we can't pretend that he didn't take a step back last year, that he's dealt with health concerns of his own. And Deontay Johnson is a young spring chicken. I'm willing to draft him as like a low-end wide receiver 3 that I'll actually put in my lineup every single week, but I think that there's top 24 potential here.
What is or let me phrase it this way. Is there a percentage chance, I can't talk today, is there a percentage chance that we actually see Deontay Johnson overtake Juju Smith-Schuster as the wide receiver 1 in this offense?
I don't think so. I mean, there's definitely a percentage chance. I mean, I would say it's probably closer to like maybe 10%, but Juju having the relationship with Roethlisberger, moving back into the slot, I think that all benefits him. But again, we can't pretend that there's no risk or chance that happens because Roethlisberger has said nothing but good things about Deontay Johnson. Johnson was actually calling him like all offseason, asking him, he said he's been asking me questions like every single day on how to get better. And that just shows you he wants to build rapport with his quarterback, and that's a really smart thing to do.
All right, Matt, let's go to you. Number 7 guy.
Number 7, I have Zach Moss. And this kind of comes with the caveat that it depends on the type of league that you are in. I'm seeing his ADP vary wildly. In sharp leagues, so maybe some leagues at the FFPC or something like that, you can see him go in round 6, round 7. In more of your friends and family type of leagues, I think he's still going later in your drafts. And so if you're in one of those leagues, I think Moss is really someone to target, especially if you're taking a little more of a 0 RB or modified 0 RB approach. I think he's going to come pretty close to splitting carries in Buffalo with Devin Singletary. Not that it's going to be a totally even split. I still give the edge in carries to Singletary, but Moss will definitely get his carries. He might be the better receiving back, and he's probably the better goal line back. So I think he's going to have a built-in workload right away. And if it actually works out that he's the better back, if he overtakes Singletary, then he could just totally explode and easily pay off value. So as far as the running backs go, he's the guy later in drafts that I'm looking at.
Real quick,
Now,
are you worried that we heard the Bills' name attached to Leonard Fournette in talks?
Not really. I think that's just them kind of doing their diligence.
Yeah, I know the Bills are a team that's obviously open to having a timeshare, as we saw last year. And I love Moss. I've always been a fan. And it looks like yesterday, I just looked this up, he shed his red no contact jersey, which he was missing practice with some sort of neck issue. But it's good to see him clear to that. But when I saw the Bills being attached to Leonard Fournette a little bit, it scared me just a little bit, because it's like this team is clearly maybe not done at the running back position, because we went into last year, like they had LaShawn McCoy, they had Devin Singletary, they had Frank Gore, they had TJ Yeldon, and we were like, what is happening? And they obviously cut LaShawn McCoy, but in the end, it's crazy to think that the Bills would even think about adding another running back.
Matt, put this into context for me. I'm going to give you a few names here and just rank these. Put these into order for me. So Sony Michel, Matt Breida, and let's say Marlon Mack and Zach Moss. Can you put those guys into order? Sony Michel, Matt Breida, and Marlon Mack and Zach Moss. Who are the guys that you want?
I have Breida ahead of Moss, so I would probably go Breida, Moss, Marlon Mack, and then Sony Michel, I think is the guy in last place there.
Okay. All right. For me, the guy at number 7 is Cam Newton. And we're looking at the quarterback position, and rushing volume, rushing production is king. And that's why Matt talked about Tyrod Taylor. Now you're looking at Cam Newton in New England here, and a Cam Newton who has had a full year and a half to recover from his injuries, get his body right. He's been training like nobody's business. Everything out of camp says that Cam Newton is back to his full health, that there are no concerns. And here's the thing with Cam Newton is that we're going to find out really quickly what we have on the field. Now, if we had preseason games and we saw that Cam Newton was back to fully healthy, I think his ADP would skyrocket. But right now he's at QB 15, going outside the top 12 quarterbacks. And I'm saying, and I want to mention him here in this conversation, because I think you need to have confidence to wait on quarterback if you are drafting and take the shot on Cam Newton. Because especially you look at his week 1 matchup against Miami, and I think he can absolutely produce if, again, with the caveat that he's fully healthy, which again, all reports are. So I want Cam Newton on my rosters this year. I have him everywhere. And this is a guy that I think you should be drafting with confidence too. Tags, I know that you're a little bit further down on Cam Newton, so I'll just turn this over to you. Have you kind of stayed neutral with Cam Newton there? Because I think you have him around where his ADP is going, if memory serves correctly. But Have you seen him rise in your rankings at all, or is he still right there?
He hasn't risen in my rankings, and them cutting Mohamed Sanu is not helping either, because it's like we have a lot of unknowns on this team. It seems like they do want to run the ball quite a bit. Cam Newton, am I worried about him as a game changer anymore? Yeah, I am, now that he's 31 years old. It's getting up there. And he has reportedly been healthy, but he also hasn't been reportedly very impressive throughout Patriots camp, that he's just kind of like, he wasn't separating himself from Jared Stidham, and that's why it was actually a competition. We always knew Cam was going to get that job. Like, that's realistically, That's what's going to happen. But I don't know how to feel about this Patriots team right now. I don't even know how to project them, to be honest with you. It's a really difficult team to go through, but based on where Cam Newton's going in drafts, I don't think he's a must-own player, but I also don't think he's a must-avoid, because if you get him at like the QB 14 or 15 off the board, I'm okay with that, because the risk-reward factor is obviously in your favor.
Right. All right, Tags, let's go to you, number 6 on your countdown.
Number 6, I'm going to totally cheat on this one, and I'm gonna combine 2 players because I kind of want both of them, but you're probably going to have to make a choice, one or the other. It's Tyler Boyd and AJ Green. Love them both. And I've been on record as saying that I think every Bengals skill position player is probably going to outperform their ADP, because again, this is another offense that underperformed last year, but if you go through and look at it in neutral game scripts, what Zach Taylor was doing with his offense, he was throwing the ball a ton. Even though Andy Dalton didn't, he missed, I think, 3 full games in there and then pardon another one. Andy Dalton should have finished as a top 12 fantasy quarterback based on the opportunity he had in 2019. So if you go fast forward and you say Joe Burrow, I understand you're a rookie, but we're expecting you to be at least competent in this offense. I think this offense is going to outperform so many expectations. Tyler Boyd's a fantastic target, 147 targets in his first season under Zach Taylor. Clearly, he's a big foundation of this. John Ross, I know he missed 8 games. AJ Green, when he's on the field, I don't think anybody can deny he's one of the best talents in the NFL. Why is T.Y. Hilton being drafted over A.J. Green? He's also over 30 years old. He has not been nearly as productive as A.J. Green when he's on the field. His quarterback situation, I would say, is worse with Phillip Rivers than it is with Joe Burrow. So it's like, what are we doing here? So if you want to argue against A.J. Green, why aren't you arguing against T.Y. Hilton too and just burying him in your rankings? Where these two are being drafted, I think both are values. I think A.J. Green and Tyler Boyd are both going to be weekly plays in fantasy football.
I love the Boyd selection there. And again, this is an offense that you want to invest in because it is going to put up points, and especially when you look at their defense too. We've talked about it. Their defense isn't anything spectacular, so that is going to lead to more passing volume, which again just creates more opportunities for fantasy football. So, all right, Matt, let's go to you, number 6 guy on your list.
Number 6, I have Marvin Jones. And I really love him at his ADP. He's someone that you can get pretty late in drafts, but I think he has the potential of, I don't want to say like duplicating what we see out of Kenny Golladay, but I think he's like a very good arbitrage play. If you just look at what he did last year in his 8 games with Matthew Stafford on the field, he was one of the top touchdown producers, one of the top overall wide receivers in the NFL. And on a points per game basis, he was right there with Kenny Golladay. We've seen strong seasons out of Jones, whether that was with the Bengals and him getting 10 touchdowns. He has that explosive scoring ability. And to get him in, round 9 to round 11, I think there's a ton of value there. So he's someone with the, later round wide receivers that I'm focusing on.
I think it's kind of the same argument with AJ Green, that as long as they're on the field, they're absolutely going to produce for fantasy football. Now, the question becomes how many games is Marvin Jones going to play? But I think, again, at the point where you're drafting him, that's not really a concern because the risk-reward factor there isn't as great as it is if you were drafting Marvin Jones in the second round, right? Like, he is going to be this 1A, 1B here in Detroit with Kenny Golladay. I love the call. All right, I'm going to bring up Jonathan Taylor as my guy here for a must-have player. Love Jonathan Taylor this year. I have him all the way up at RB15. This is just a guy who I want on my fantasy football rosters as my RB2. Now, I don't think necessarily with Marlon Mack and Nyheim Hines in this backfield that Taylor is going to ascend to a top 5 finish, right? But I think he is going to present a weekly safe RB2 floor with upside, that if you get him in the right matchup where he can score, he's going to see enough work on the ground that and again, behind this offensive line, that he can put up a high yards per carry and give you a safe floor. But then if he scores, he has the potential to win you a week. So I love the opportunity here for Jonathan Taylor. I think Marlon Mack, the minute that you put them on the field at the same time, you're going to see that Jonathan Taylor is the superior talent. He's going to quickly take over this job. Mack will still be involved. Mack will still see some touches a game, which limits, again, Jonathan Taylor's RB, or top end upside, But I love him in this offense. Behind this offensive line, I want shares of Jonathan Taylor, and I'm getting him everywhere that I can. He's at RB20 in ADP right now. I have him at RB15, so I'm ending up with him everywhere. Tags, I know that you love Jonathan Taylor this year too.
Well, I'm one-upping you because he was my number 5 player, not my number 6. So I win with Jonathan Taylor, and he's on my team. But Jonathan, yeah, I don't know why people are avoiding him. I understand that you're worried about Marlon Mack. But, guys, understand this. Jordan Wilkins and Jonathan Williams last year combined for 100 carries. Okay, that's a lot of carries. That could basically be Marlon Mack's workload this year. All right, Marlon Mack himself missed 2 games and still had 247 carries. Jonathan Taylor is a freak. Like, why are we avoiding this? I just feel like this is one of those situations where people are overthinking it. They're putting too much stock into Marlon Mack. The Colts don't draft Jonathan Taylor if they like Marlon Mack. Bottom line, They don't, especially in the second round. So knowing this team is going to be more potent with Phillip Rivers under center, I think there's going to be a lot of room. It's a discounted Nick Chubb is what it is. And people are drafting Nick Chubb at the end of the first round, beginning of the second. You're getting Taylor around that RB20 range. You're talking like the 4th round. I'm willing to take him in the 3rd.
Absolutely. So that was your number 5, guys. So Matt, let's go to you here for number 5 on the countdown of must-have players.
So similar to Marvin Jones, who has missed some time in previous seasons, but I really don't think of him as an injury-prone guy. My guy here is Deshawn Jackson, and maybe he's injury-prone, but think it's just a little bit more of he's missed some games and had some bad injury luck as opposed to he's really injury prone. If he plays 13 games, I think he has a pretty decent chance of leading this really at this point already injury depleted Eagles wide receiver unit in yards, and I think maybe even that whole offense, even with Zach Ertz, that whole offense in air yards, which I think would give him like tremendous upside. So he's someone. I mean, I don't want to say he's free because he's not exactly free, but you can get him, after round 10 pretty easily in a lot of drafts, and sometimes it's closer to round 12, round 13. But he has a legitimate chance to be the number one receiver, or at least number one wide receiver within that offense. And I think that offense is going to be pretty decent. So we've seen what he can do in the past. He's someone I love taking a shot on very late.
Love this call. Deshawn Jackson going outside like the top 60 wide receivers. And so you look at his week 1 matchup, guys, against Washington. The corners on Washington, oh my word. Fabian Moreau, Kendall Fuller, Ronald Darby, and Jimmy Moreland are the Washington corners. None of those guys can keep up with Deshaun Jackson, right? So the things that the stat line that we saw him put up in week 1 of last year, I think he can easily repeat that in week 1. So if you do draft Deshaun Jackson late, absolutely plug him into your flex, plug him into your wide receiver 3 spot, whatever. Get him into your starting lineup week 1 because I absolutely love the call there. All right, let's move on here to, what are we at, guys? Number 4?
You're number 5.
Or my number 5, excuse me. That is Joe Mixon. And I'm bringing up Joe Mixon here because we're seeing that we saw his ADP fall, right? With the concerns of that he's missing practice, all this. I want to mention him here because I think that he should be going even higher than his ADP is. I've met RB6 this year. I love his opportunity in this offense. I mentioned it on yesterday's podcast that from weeks, 11 through 17, last season, Joe Mixon was the RB3 in all of fantasy football, and that was with Ryan Finley at quarterback. Like, Joe Mixon was the only guy in this backfield, and we saw Zach Taylor wise up, right, and give the ball to Joe Mixon towards the end of the year. You look at his game logs, 20-something carries the last 5 games of the season. So I get it that the target volume isn't necessarily there, that it's going to inflate him to a potential RB1 finish. But in this offense with Joe Burrow at quarterback, Tags was talking about this Bengals offense, and he wants shares. I want Joe Mixon, particularly in this offense, and I think just saying this, I want to mention him here because I want people to have confidence in drafting him in the first round. I think he's absolutely going to return value this year. Tags, do you agree?
Yeah, I have him at RB8 right now, so I'm obviously in on him. And if you get him in the end of the first round, I'm totally fine with that. I think there's a lot of people that get into that range and they start thinking about wide receivers, but running backs are hard to find, especially ones like Mixon, who he averaged, I think it was over 23 touches per game over the Bengals' final 9 games, if I'm not mistaken. Basically, when the team realized that they needed to get the ball in his hands a lot more. So again, there's a lot of opportunity in this offense, and especially with Joe Burrow at the helm, they're going to score a lot more football points. So I do like Mixon as an RB1 this year. Where I'm torn is whether or not I'd choose him over someone like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, because I think Edwards-Helaire is obviously part of the better offense in a clear 3-down role. But I can make the argument for one or the other.
Yep, for sure. All right, let's move on here. Number 4 guy. Give me the elevator pitch here on your number 4 guy, Tags.
James Conner. I want James Conner, and I'm really mad when he comes off the board before I'm willing to draft him. You were getting him in the 5th round, a few weeks ago. Now all of a sudden you're seeing him go at the end of the 2nd round. People are catching on. He's a guy. If you look at his numbers over the last 2 years, and then look at the 2019 numbers of Joe Mixon, Josh Jacobs, Nick Chubb. He dominates all those guys in consistency and what he does when he's on the field. Is there health questions? There has been, and that's why you're getting a discount, because otherwise he would be a late 1st round pick. So James Conner, especially with his public draft ADP in the 4th round, draft him. If you draft him in the 3rd round, you should absolutely do that because he's going to live up to an RB1 when he's on the field.
All right, Matt, let's go here to you for your number 4 guy.
Will Fuller. And at this point, not nearly as attractive as a pick as he was, a few months ago when you could get him a little bit later. But I still like him even in the 6th round. I think he should be around, wide receiver 18 or something like that. And you can get him normally around wide receiver 30-ish. So, there's so much value. He's coming with that injury discount. People are just assuming that he's going to miss games. And yes, he will probably miss games. but I think a reasonable projection for games played is something like 13. And if he plays 13 games, he could still end up being like a high-end wide receiver 2 on the season. And it's not as if you take zeros for the games that he misses. So he's someone I really do want to prioritize.
Absolutely has the potential to blow up and win you a matchup. Like, we can't deny that, right? And so I think Will Fuller, if you are getting that discount, right, in your draft where you're taking him, like, what's the cutoff for you, Matt, really quick before I mention my number 4 guy? What's your cutoff where you say, like, okay, he's going a little bit too early for me to invest in? Is that where you load up on running backs early and you say, I have to have Will Fuller as my wide receiver 2 on my roster? Is that too early?
No, I don't really need him as my wide receiver 2. I'm happy if I get him as the wide receiver 3. I don't think I would reach for him as the wide receiver 2 because I still want to get him where I'm getting value.
Right. Sure, that's baked in. Okay, cool. My number 4, guys, is Robert Woods. And we saw just recently the other day that Gerald Everett, the Rams tight end, alluding to the fact that they are going to be running heavy 12 personnel this year, which, again, that was the big concern with Cooper Kupp's value this year, right? And we've talked about that where we saw last season Cooper Kupp, just his fantasy production fall off a cliff because they ran heavy 12 personnel, which means, again, 1 running back, 2 tight ends on the field, which takes the slot receiver off the field. Robert Woods stays on the field in those instances as the outside receiver. You're seeing Van Jefferson step up to become the wide receiver 3 in this offense. He will stay on the outside. He's an outside receiver. Again, I'm not projecting him to be like a huge target hog in this offense. It's going to be Robert Woods, and then it's going to be Cooper Kupp when he's on the field. Tyler Higbee will see work as well. Gerald Everett, of course, will see work as well. Robert Woods absolutely has the chance to... We look back at this time next year and we say, why did we let Robert Woods fall so far down our drafts? 90 receptions last year, only 2 touchdowns. Guys, that is going to bounce back. There's no way that he finishes back-to-back years with 90 receptions and 2 receiving touchdowns. He's going to bounce back, and if that is the case, he's an easy candidate for a top 12 finish. I love Robert Woods this year. All right, Tags, let's go to you here for your number 3 guy.
Zach Ertz, number 3. Zach Ertz is someone that, when I started drafting this offseason, I wasn't getting a whole lot of Ertz. And then I started taking a look at the landscape and saying, okay, if you miss out on those top tier tight end guys, who else can you look at? And Ertz was falling into the 5th round sometimes, and I found myself just like auto picking him. And now it's making more sense than ever. This guy saw 135 targets last year. By comparison, Travis Kelce saw 136. No other tight end saw more than 117. The efficiency was down for Ertz last year, and a lot of that came down to the fact that their receivers were just dead, and teams were able to game plan against someone like Zach Ertz and the tight ends over the middle of the field. But now having Deshawn Jackson back, it's going to help stretch the field. Like we all know, Deshawn Jackson's a game changer in terms of, I don't even care what you think about for fantasy. I'm talking about what he does for your actual football team. He stretches the field. And this team clearly went into the offseason and said, we want speed. And they drafted John Hightower. They drafted Jalen Reagor. And they tried to get Marquise Goodwin to get him on there. I know he opted out, but this is a team that they want to stretch the field and open things up underneath to clear out room for those tight ends. Knowing that Reagor is going to probably miss a couple weeks, knowing that Alshon Jeffrey is never on the field, and even though they're hoping to get him back in September, I'm not, you shouldn't be relying on that. Zach Ertz is going to see 8+ targets every single game, and he's one of the most reliable tight ends there is out there, especially with Carson Wentz under center. Ertz is someone, late 4th, early 5th. If he's on the board, which is where his ADP is right now, it's kind of crazy that he's fallen that far.
People were ready to write him off for fantasy football at the beginning of the offseason, especially after the draft. And then now you just see these weapons continue to fall off, and they're going to need to rely on Ertz again. And again, we talk about Carson Wentz absolutely loves him. So even though Dallas Goedert is probably going to be on the field and should still be involved, there's more than enough work for Ertz to return value. I love the call there, Tags. Let's go to you, Matt, for your number 3 guy.
I have James Conner, and Tags made the case for him earlier, and I'll just kind of second everything that Tags said there. I think even though his ADP has moved up over the past couple of months, he still provides value where he's going. And so even if you take him at the end of the 2nd round, the beginning of the 3rd round, I don't think at that point you really are reaching for him because you're still getting him at a value relative to what he's probably going to do this season as long as Ben Roethlisberger stays healthy.
All right, I'm moving on here to my number 3 guy. I'm assuming that he's on Tags' list. It's Calvin Ridley. And looking at Calvin Ridley in this offense, I am fine going into this season, loading up on running back I did this yesterday in the draft that Tags and I were talking about in the company draft, where in a 14-team league, I loaded up on running back early, and then I waited, and I got Calvin Ridley as my wide receiver 1 for my roster. I am perfectly fine going into this season with Calvin Ridley as my number 1 wide receiver. I think he is absolutely going to break out in a huge way this year. And looking at this offense and saying that, are you going to be comfortable relying on giving Todd Gurley 250-plus carries on the season that would balance out your pass-to-rush splits? No. No, you can't. Like, looking at what he has done previously and his injury concerns, this is not going to be a balanced offense, especially with Dirk Cutter as the offensive coordinator. They're going to be throwing the ball a ton. So you look at Julio Jones, of course, is going to be the clear-cut number 1 in this offense. Hayden Hurst should be involved. Calvin Ridley is the touchdown guy in this offense. Matt Ryan loves looking his way in the red zone, and I think that I only have them projected for 624 pass attempts on the season, right, only. But 684 pass attempts last year. There is a very realistic chance that they get up to 700 pass attempts. If that's the case, Tags, would we even be surprised? If they get up to 700 pass attempts to see Julio and Calvin Ridley both finish within the top 5.
I mean, considering what they have at running back, I would not be shocked about anything. Like, they have zero depth behind Todd Gurley, and we know that Gurley is I don't want to say fragile, but he's obviously someone to monitor, and they have to worry about his touch count. So,
right.
Yeah, they're going to have a lot of pass attempts.
Yep, and those are the offenses that I want to buy into. So, all right, Tags, let's go to you here for your number 2 on our top 10 countdown of must-have players.
Well, I had one up to again. I mean, I have Robert Woods as my number 2, but instead of talking about him, I'll just transition to another guy I wanted to put, but I was like, I think it just depends on where you fall in the draft. But so I'm just going to mention Clyde Edwards-Helaire here. His current ADP in public drafts is 18th overall, and again, I know people that are in the industry are listening and be like, oh, he goes at 8 or 9 in my draft. Right. Well, in industry leagues, yes, he's going to, because industry leagues, we have a lot smarter guys and they understand what you're getting with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But in public leagues, if his average draft position as a consensus is around 18 overall, you can get him. If you get him at the end of the first, it's a no-brainer for me. Obviously, second round, it's a no-brainer. This guy, I do believe Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to be the Ray Rice moving forward. And if you guys remember, Ray Rice was a consensus top 3 running back every single year. He was consistent. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire is tied to a better offense with the Chiefs. So I love him. And if you get him in a keeper league, I mean, you're going to be keeping him for a long time.
Completely agree. All right, Matt, let's go to you here for your number 2 guy.
Cam Akers, and I feel like I've kind of become the guy for Cam Akers this offseason, and totally fine with that. I will probably see this blow up in my face, but whatever, I will be there. What I love about Akers is that he was a 5-star recruit entering college. In college, he was, I think, overwhelmingly productive in horrible situations at Florida State, especially playing behind one of the worst offensive lines in college football. He's young, just 21 years old as a rookie. At the combine, he exhibited great athleticism for his size. He's over 215 pounds, but ran under a 4.5 second 40-yard time. And then he has that opportunity within the Rams offense. And I don't really put a lot of stock in the team thinking that highly of Darrell Henderson or Malcolm Brown or anything like that. Given that they invested a second-round pick in Cam Akers, and given all of the other things that he has going for him, I think he's going to come in and week 1 be the guy. So given what we saw out of Todd Gurley in that role in previous years, I'm pretty optimistic about Akers.
Yeah, I remember talking about him with you on our that live stream, the Fantasy Fest that we did a couple weeks ago. So yeah. You remember talking to you about him, and you've stuck to your guns. So Cam Akers there, and his opportunity is looking even better now that Darrell Henderson is, still working his way back into practice, may be ready for week 1. Cam Akers absolutely has the potential to take over this job and run away with it. Jonnu Smith, guys, for me, I'm going to talk about him super quick because I have talked about him all offseason. I love his athleticism, his ability after the catch. And in this offense, you're talking about rack. You're talking about run after the catch ability for these wide receivers. That's why A.J. Brown was so good last season, because of that ability. Jonnu Smith is the next guy up in this offense, I believe. And beat reporters are predicting that Jonnu Smith is going to break out this season based on what they're seeing in practice. That's all I needed to know. I'm all in on Jonnu Smith this year and absolutely love his opportunity. I think he's going to be the breakout guy. Again, tight end 16 in ADP right now. I want him everywhere that I can get him, and I have him everywhere that I can get him. Okay, let's move on. Number 1 guy here, Tags. Let's fly through this one. Who do you have your number 1 must-have player for 2020?
Well, it's Calvin Ridley. He was. I went up to you again. I mean, I'm gonna get all your guys, Yates. I don't know how to break this to you. But Calvin Ridley's my number one. I want to have him on every roster if I can. I understand sometimes it comes down to where you're drafting, but if you have to draft him in the third round, I'm cool with it. By the way, guys, just real quick before we get to Matt as number one, Bruce Arians.
Yeah, I saw that.
Was being interviewed. He said Rojo is our guy. It's his job. Nothing has changed for him. It's his job. He's got it. He's got to screw it up to lose it, and I don't see that happening. So clearly, Leonard Fournette is not walking into the starter job in week one. So it's some additional risk, and it's gross.
Yeah, again, we'll keep you guys updated as we get more news. Make sure to tune back in for tomorrow's podcast because I'm sure that we'll be talking more about that. But Calvin Ridley, completely agree, Tags, obviously. But here's my question for you. Where do you have him ranked?
Calvin Ridley, I have ranked at wide receiver 13.
Okay, I have him at wide receiver 7, so I won up to you. Okay, Matt, where are you going here with your number one guy?
I'm going with Cam Newton. Anytime I have the opportunity to get a running quarterback who has top 5 upside, who's going outside of the top 12, that's someone that I just kind of want to anchor my teams around, my strategies around, because even if it doesn't work out, you just stream the position. So Newton is someone I'm invested in pretty much wherever I can be.
Obviously, you know that I like that. I had him as my number 7 guy, so I love Cam Newton this year. And again, we're kind of simpatico here on quarterbacks. You're talking about Tyrod Taylor and Cam Newton. Those are 2 guys that I've been touting all off season. I love it. Hayden Hurst for me, Tags. I'm shocked that you did not mention Hayden Hurst. Hayden Hurst is my number 1 must-have player, so above Jonnu Smith, guys. So I've said this all off season that I love Jonnu Smith. I love Hayden Hurst even more. And the way that I'm approaching my drafts is I'm targeting Hayden Hurst where I can get him as a value, right? He's going tight end 12 off the board right now. Crazy value. Tight end 13, excuse me. So crazy value. If I can get him there, I'm pulling the trigger. And then I'm saying I'm good with the tight end position. If I miss out on Hayden Hurst, if I'm in a league with someone that listens to this podcast and they snipe Hayden Hurst from me, I will wait another round and I will grab Jonnu Smith. So Hayden Hurst is the guy that I want. And it's for a lot of the same reasons that we're talking about Calvin Ridley. Passing volume in this offense. Hayden Hurst, they spent a second-round pick to go acquire him. He is a talented tight end. Don't get it mixed up that the fact that he was behind Mark Andrews in Baltimore doesn't mean that he's a bad tight end. He can absolutely contribute. We saw Austin Hooper be dominant for fantasy football in this offense. I love Hayden Hurst's opportunity this year. I'm getting him everywhere that I can. All right, guys, that is going to do it for today's show. Matt, as always, it's a ton of fun to talk some football with you. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. Don't forget to find and follow him on Twitter at MattFTheOracle. You can also find and follow Tags and I on Twitter at KyleYNFL and at Mike Tagliere NFL if you don't already. And I'll just say this. Thank you all so much for the reviews again and all the support. We love getting to do this for you every day, and we're so thankful for each and every person that listens to the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode. For Mike Tagliere and Matt Friedman, I'm Kyle Yates, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. While you're there, don't forget to subscribe on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to help give you the edge you need in your fantasy football league.